Welcome to the Kottke Ride Home for Friday, February 25th, 2022. I'm Jackson Bird. Today, the meme accounts behind some of the spread of misinformation already happening this week, as well as some guidance for seeking out and sharing accurate information. Plus, seals that are being recruited by scientists to spy on whales. And the latest vaccine seeking authorization. Here are some of the cool things from the news today. As I very briefly mentioned at the end of yesterday's show, almost immediately following Russia's invasion of Ukraine Wednesday night, fake photos and videos started circulating. Not too surprisingly, the internet became a minefield of misleading imagery. Taylor Lorenz, the Gen Z whisperer, soon to begin her tenure as an internet culture columnist at the Washington Post after leaving the New York Times, leapt into action and managed to track down a few of the account holders circulating misattributed imagery and misleading information. Now taken down by Instagram for violating community guidelines, the account Live from Ukraine amassed 3.7 million followers and claimed to be a journalist live streaming from the ground in Kiev. But it was actually run by a 21-year-old named Hayden from Kentucky, at least if those self-reported details can be believed. Hayden runs a whole network of meme pages on Instagram, including another, smaller account which was also taken down called POV Warfare. That account also claimed to be run by a journalist currently in Ukraine. Quoting Lorenz, "The accounts are what have become known as war pages on Instagram. They gather shocking battleground footage and videos depicting violence and repost them on Instagram with little to no context, often in an effort to leverage tragedy and conflict to gain followers. War accounts such as Waraholics, military_footage, and war_strikes have all gained followers since the crisis in Ukraine heated up. Some then monetize these followers by posting advertisements, often for OnlyFans creators. The sensationalized content found on war pages performs well in the feed and garners views at an alarming rate. These posts do so well because Ukraine is a super hot topic right now, and there's shock value in videos of an airstrike," says Rowan Winch, the 17-year-old chief social officer of Fallen Media, a meme-focused content studio. Since Live from Ukraine and other war pages were set to private, would-be followers had to request to join. This is a well-known tactic for spurring the growth of meme pages. What pages like that usually do is wait a couple of days for all the followers to request, then they'll accept them after the topic has died down, and more likely than not, everyone has forgotten why they followed, Winch says. Once the account has accrued enough followers, it can pivot to something unrelated, even a brand page. End quote. And that kind of bait and switch does seem to be Hayden's MO. Here's a sampling of things that he told Lorenz, quote, "What I'm trying to do is get as many followers as possible by using my platform and skills. I don't really know what's going on with all this political tension. I'm just trying to document what's going on." End quote. He says that he can't really verify the videos he shares to the pages and isn't concerned about spreading misinformation because, quote, "No one even knows what's going on. They believe anything that's put in front of them. I'm putting up what I believe is accurate, and they can draw an opinion based on that." End quote. There's trying to neutrally present information so people can form their own opinions, and then there's being irresponsibly lazy and pumping out false information to millions of people. Lorenz spoke with Joan Donovan, the research director at the Harvard Kennedy Shorenstein Center for Media Politics and Public Policy, who said that people would have a tendency to trust an account claiming to be a journalist, and which has a huge following. Lorenz adds that the bigger the accounts are, the more trustworthy they seem to average users. Even when it posts content being identified as false in the comments or intersperses war footage with ads, some people still see it as legit because of the follower count, if just making some odd choices or mistakes. But especially on Instagram, accounts with large followings are frequently swapped around between people in formal or informal networks. Models getting accounts from their agencies preloaded with tens of thousands of followers. Meme pages swapping around with each other. One Gen Zer told me once that he was giving a friend an account with a bunch of followers for his birthday. High follower counts mean less these days than they ever did, if they ever did, when it comes to legitimacy and authentication. And yet, many of us still have at least some reflexive tendency to see it as a marker of just that, because we've been trained to do so. And like we've seen with prior crises, the way that some people are taking advantage of that without giving much thought to the consequences of their actions could have real-world effects. As one more responsible Instagram meme creator, Jackson Waymer, told Lawrence, quote, "This is just the beginning of war accounts on Instagram. War is just another thing these meme accounts can monetize." End quote. And while I like to think that I wouldn't be fooled by a meme account like that with its myriad red flags, the content that they generate and amplify can be spread to other places where maybe it isn't so easy to tell if it's real or not. Writing today in an MIT Tech Review guide for avoiding the spread of bad information, Abby Olheiser said, quote, "Disinformation has been a prominent and explicit part of the Russian government's campaign to justify the invasion. Russia falsely claimed that Ukrainian forces in Donbas, a city in the southeastern part of the country that harbors a large number of pro-Russian separatists, were planning violent attacks, engaging in antagonistic shelling, and committing genocide. Fake videos of those non-existent attacks became a part of a domestic propaganda campaign. The U.S. government, meanwhile, has been working to debunk and pre-bunk these lies. Meanwhile, even people who are not part of such government campaigns may intentionally share bad, misleading, or false information about the invasion to promote ideological narratives or simply harvest clicks with little care about the harm they're causing. In other cases, honest mistakes made amid the fog of war take off and go viral. Already, bad information about the Russian invasion has found large audiences on platforms fundamentally designed to promote content that gets engagement. On TikTok, a 2016 video of a training exercise was repurposed to create the false impression that Russian soldiers were parachuting into Ukraine. It was viewed millions of times. A mistranslation of a statement that circulated widely on Twitter and was shared by journalists falsely stated that fighting near Chernobyl had disturbed a nuclear waste site. The original statement actually warned that fighting might disturb nuclear waste. Harmful propaganda and misinformation are often inadvertently amplified as people face the fire hose of breaking news and interact with viral posts about a terrible event. End quote. Olheiser further shared some specific guidance to avoid contributing to the spread of bad information, updated advice that the Tech Review has shared in prior incidents of heightened misinformation in the US. And while some of it may sound obvious, it's worth being reminded of at a time like this. So first, remember that even if you don't have a big following, anything you post online has an impact. It can increase engagement for a post, and it can still be seen by people, even if a small number. And one of those small number of people could help share it to a wider audience. Everything we do online has an impact. Mike Caulfield, a digital literacy expert, put together a method he calls SIFT. Stop, investigate the source, find better coverage, and trace claims, quotes, and media to the original context. Think about whether you're really equipped to do all of that, and if not, should you be sharing something at all? Even just in texts to friends, resist the urge to be the first to share something until you've double-checked its veracity. And keep in mind that your friends or the people you follow that you usually trust for news might be stumbling right now too, as everything happens so quickly. One particular challenge Caulfield points out is the language barrier. It's far tougher for folks who don't speak Ukrainian or Russian to suss out legitimacy in sources right now, so rely on experts who can actually translate them. Kate Starbird, a disinformation researcher, also reminds people with kids to check up on what they're being exposed to. Quote, borrow their feed for a bit to see what they're seeing. In addition to potentially violent content, check for propaganda. Russia's network of gray propaganda creators know how to package content up for TikTok and other formats. End quote. In that same thread from Starbird, which I'll link in the show notes, she additionally advises, quote, fog of war conditions mean that our understanding of what's happening is going to change over time as we gain more information. Media and political leaders may have to correct themselves. That doesn't mean that they're lying. That's how information works in crisis contexts. End quote. And beyond just the fog of war, this is an occasion in which misleading information is not just coming from meme accounts grossly using a war for their own profit, but from national propaganda arms and information attacks. So it is extra important that you are double checking any accounts you're getting information from, again, even if you've trusted that account before. And to that end, if you are someone with any level of following or who is discussing this topic, go through and ramp up your cybersecurity on all of your accounts to avoid it becoming compromised. One of the most important pieces of advice from Starbird, Olheiser, and others, though, step away from the news, from social media, and just take a break when you need it. Quoting Olheiser, "Sometimes when an important and horrible thing is happening in the world, looking away or taking a break feels like apathy. It's not. Stop doom scrolling." End quote. And to that end, I've put some of these resources in the show notes for you to revisit when you're up for it. But for now, let's take a break with some less gloomy news from the world. Well, even with that break from our sponsors, this still feels a bit like a content whiplash from the last segment. But, I didn't want the whole show to be about the ongoing horrors in the world. And I do mean what I said yesterday, that I don't intend to discuss the situation in Ukraine that much. But at the same time, so much is happening in so many directions right now. It's most of what the news is about and most of what any of us can think about. None of us know exactly what will happen going forward. So yes, there will likely be more quasi-related segments here and there. Like I considered discussing today the impact of Russia's current actions on the International Space Station. And maybe I will talk about that next week. I will at least always be striving for that coverage to be in line with the kinds of content and ideas that I usually include here on the Kottke Ride Home. So yeah, space, that makes sense. And that previous segment was about our relationship with social media, another thing I discuss frequently. This is not going to become a geopolitical podcast. I'm sussing this out a little bit as we go, but I still plan to mostly focus on cool and interesting topics from science, history, art, and more. Which brings us to elephant seals that scientists have recruited to eavesdrop on whales. Or, as Olivier Parfait-Callery jokingly called them on Twitter, Navy SEALs. I wish I could show you a photo of seals right now to cleanse your mind after all this heavy talk, but just, imagine a smiling seal with its tongue flopping out and little fins fluttering. Maybe it has a waterproof microphone strapped around its back, looking like one of those sharks with frickin' laser beams attached to their heads in Austin Powers. Because that's basically what a team of marine biologists from the University of California, Santa Cruz are doing. They're using epoxy adhesive to attach $5,000 recording devices, roughly the size of an old cell phone, to female seals at the Año Nuevo Reserve in Northern California, according to Vox. Who adds that females were selected because they have a higher survival rate and reliably head to sea right after weaning their pups. And that survivability is key because these recording devices don't have the ability to transmit acoustic data. The scientists will have to collect the devices again, and so if the seal goes missing or loses it, all the data will be lost. And even though this sounds a bit offbeat, this actually isn't the first time it's been done. Although most of the time underwater recordings, like the ones I mentioned on Wednesday, are conducted by, hanging a recording device from a boat, not putting it on an animal. 10 years ago, though, biologists glued recording devices to the backs of male elephant seals to try to learn if they vocalize while foraging for food. When the seals returned, instead of any noises from the seals, the biologists were treated to the creaking, clicking call of sperm whales, which the seals may have been sticking close to and low-key spying on in order to find sources of their own food. Now, the team from UCSC is planning to become the first ones to use one animal to spy on another for longer than a few days. The seals are gearing up for a 75-day trip, and the recording devices will last for 40 of those days before running out of batteries. Quoting Vox, "Elephant seals spend around 9 months each year at sea and travel across far reaches of the Pacific that would otherwise be difficult for scientists to survey. And like migratory birds, the seals return to the same spot year after year, so researchers can equip them with recording devices and retrieve them relatively easily. What they overhear could help scientists unlock the mysteries of elusive marine mammals, such as beaked whales, and understand how poorly known ecosystems are changing as the planet warms. End quote. And more on the seals, quoting further, "Elephant seals might look clumsy on land, but they're agile underwater creatures that make ideal marine sentinels. They spend months at a time foraging far offshore, not even returning home to sleep. The animals likely take naps while drifting a few hundred meters underwater," said Roxanne Beltran, an assistant professor at UCSC who's co-leading the project. Elephant seals descend as much as a mile underwater when hunting for small fish, squid, and even sharks, and that brings them within earshot of whales and other marine mammals. Conveniently enough, seals don't make much noise. They're not contaminating the data, says Holger Klink, an expert at bioacoustics at Cornell University, who's co-leading the project with Beltran. They're really only measuring what's going on in their surroundings. End quote. Once the silent spies return, the auditory data will be run through algorithms to separate out the different sounds and start identifying which species they belong to. Allison Payne, a doctoral researcher working on the project, is particularly interested in learning more about beaked whales, who spend most of their time deep, deep underwater, and we therefore know very little about them. Payne told Vox, "It's hard to protect a species you don't understand." If this works in the future, they hope to expand the technique to gather data on more species and environments far out in the ocean that we still have so many unanswered questions about. There's another COVID-19 vaccine on the block, and it sounds pretty promising. Made by European-based pharmaceutical companies Sanofi and GSK, 2 doses of this protein-based vaccine showed 100% efficacy against severe disease and hospitalizations, 75% against moderate to severe disease, and 58% against symptomatic disease. While the New York Times points out that those numbers are actually lower than the initial trials from Pfizer-BioNTech and Moderna, it's, quoting Sanofi and GSK, "in line with expected vaccine effectiveness in today's environment dominated by variants of concern." End quote. The companies are currently in discussion for approval by the U.S. Food and Drug Administration as well as the European Medicines Agency. That the vaccine is protein-based, as exciting as the potential of mRNA technology is actually a feather in its cap. Protein-based vaccines are generally less expensive to manufacture and have more accessible storage requirements. They may also be a good option for any folks hesitant about mRNA technology. And as this is the first one with a successful global Phase 3 efficacy study that was undertaken during this phase of the pandemic with Omicron and other variants around, it does give it a further vote of confidence. Quoting CNBC, "The companies said final analysis of the booster trial, which included participants previously given shots based on mRNA technology or adenovirus viral vectors, showed it could increase neutralizing antibodies by 18 to 30 times. End quote. Sanofi and GSK fell behind in the vaccine race last year when clinical trials for the one that they developed showed disappointing results in older adults, according to the New York Times. That is no longer an issue for this improved version, and given the accessibility factors I mentioned, it could prove to be a strong candidate for rollout in nations still lacking sufficient access to vaccines. Well, I know I mentioned a bunch of resources during the lead story already, but I'm putting a few more at the end of the show notes, mostly some explainers that I've found helpful over the last 24 hours, as well as a Twitter thread of photos and anecdotes showing the beauty and diversity of Ukraine and of Ukrainian people. I'm also sharing a link to some contemporary poetry from a Ukrainian-Russian poet that I found particularly moving, if maybe a bit too grim to read aloud on the show, so fair warning there. In any case, while it is good to stay informed and vigilant, I also hope that you all get opportunities to rest this weekend. Step away from your devices, clear your head, spend time with loved ones, get some fresh air, take in some art, make some art, whatever helps you. This show was produced by Ride Home Media and Kottke.org. I'm Jackson Bird, and I will talk to you again on Monday.